Find a tabletop surface and press the trigger to start the experience. You can access the menu at any time by pressing the Home button. Welcome to the world of civilizations. The artifacts you see here represent some of history's most important treasures. Their timespan ranges from the ancient Egyptians through to the 20th century. This collection aims to represent the influence of culture and religion on human creativity and the development of art throughout the ages. Using your control, press and hold the trigger to select an artifact from the table. Then, move it to an open space to explore it at its original size. You can move the artifact back to the table at any time. Just press and hold the trigger to select it again and move it to the table. This gold-gilt mummy mask was made for the Roman citizen Titus Flavius Demetrius, who died in Egypt between 80 and 120 AD. It's purely Egyptian in fashion, showing that Titus embraced the traditions of a culture that was already thousands of years old when the Romans occupied the country. Titus was probably a Roman soldier who acquired a taste for all things Egyptian while stationed in northern Africa. He chose this Greco-Roman mummy mask instead of a traditional Roman memorial. Titus' mummy mask was restored in 1986, including the gold gilt area, which was built up using layers of a conservation filler called AJK dough. If you look closely, you'll see that the left and right eyes are different. The right eye is the original white marble with an inlaid obsidian pupil, while the left eye is made of plastozote foam. The front of the mask is decorated with images of funerary gods, including Horus and Ba on either side of the shoulders. 8 underworld gods wearing sun discs and holding feathers watch the body of Titus Flavius Demetrius, which is being tended to by Anubis at the base of the apron. This mask was traditionally a substitute for the head of the deceased, giving them godly powers and helping with their journey into the afterlife. The mask depicts Osiris, an Egyptian god of the dead, on his throne with Isis and Nephthys as mourners. The god of mummification and the afterlife, Anubis, can also be seen tending to Titus's body. Using your control, pick up the magnifying glass to discover more about the artifact. This Egyptian child's coffin is home to a 2,500-year-old mummified boy. Interestingly, the coffin is 1,000 years older than the boy and was likely made for junior royalty. The mummified boy was named Psamtik. His coffin is a masterpiece of funerary craftsmanship with finely modelled features and inlaid eyes. The coffin itself dates from the 18th dynasty, between 1525 and 1470 BC. It was likely made for a pharaoh's child, a few generations before Tutankhamun was king. At some point in history, tomb robbers seem to have removed the coffin's original occupant. The coffin was reinscribed and used again. This coffin's made out of a single log of cedar wood. It's exquisitely carved and painted, with rock crystal and bronze inlaid eyes. For a child to be given something as expensive as this, they must have had very important parents. They may even have been the king and queen. Looking at the reworked inscription, it's clear that the coffin was reused at least once, if not more often. Ancient tomb robbers probably destroyed the previous owner. You can see an obvious hole in the top of the coffin which was made to gain access. The mummy that came to Torquay Museum is nearly 1,000 years younger than the coffin itself. Psamtek's not the mummified boy's real name, but the name of a pharaoh who lived around the time of his death. The mummy's been x-rayed and CT scanned, finding no obvious cause of death. He likely died from disease aged 3 or 4 years old at a turbulent time in Egypt's past, when coffins were in short supply. The boy's protective amulets feature a winged scarab and the 4 sons of the Egyptian god Horus. This is the mask of Nuchmal, a fool dancer from the Kwakwaka'wakw indigenous peoples of British Columbia and Northwest America. It's believed this mask was made by the Kwakiutl tribe. The mask would have been used in their winter dance ceremonies. The Nuchmal role in the ceremonies was to help police and protect the tribe by ensuring tradition and protocol were followed. Any transgressions would result in the Nuchmal dancing or acting wildly in protest. The size of the lip plug was only one indication of the status of the wearer. The material used to make the plug was also a sign of status, with more elite women making use of more expensive and rarer materials than others. Some very fine examples were made of wood inlaid with incised mother of pearl. Winter ceremonials reenacted the adventures of hero ancestors and spirit beings in the mythological past. While the themes are similar, the ceremonies were complex and varied in detail from region to region. The rites to these ritual dances were passed down in families as treasured privileges. Some people believe the Nuchmal character masks were influenced by the early European seafarers. It's thought that lion-head carvings on early explorers and trade ships inspired the mask's feline-like eyebrows, nose and whiskers, although this is hard to prove. This carved mask is more than a ceremonial prop. It forms part of the living tradition of the Kwakiutl culture and links people to their community, collective cultural beliefs, and personal ancestral histories. Despite a prolonged campaign of cultural suppression by the Canadian government throughout the late 19th until the mid-20th centuries, these ceremonies have continued, albeit with modification, through to the present day. The Yoruba people of Nigeria used the divination system known as Ifa to help make important decisions. They'd consult the Ifa priest, the Babalawo, about whether, for example, to start a new business venture or to make a journey now or later. This wooden figure of a mother and baby was part of that divination process. The bowl, carried on the head of the mother, held the palm nuts that were used by the Ifa priest to help make his predictions. The carving of the figure shows the Yoruba style. Features such as the large oval eyes, the elaborate hair and the facial scarifications are typical of Yoruba art. Scarification was usually carried out in childhood as a sign of Yoruba identity. Yoruba babies and toddlers are traditionally carried on their mother's back using a cloth wrapper to tie them in position. It's considered bad luck for a baby to fall out. If that happens, it was believed the mother should run naked around the marketplace, otherwise her child would be widowed 7 times. The bowl was used in the Ifa system of divination, in which palm nuts were thrown to make predictions. The diviner would then use one of a huge number of poems and prose writings to predict and advise. Henry Moore began a series of open-work heads in 1950, after spending time documenting miners during the Second World War. It's possible the sculptures relate to miners' helmets and the iconography of modern industrialization. These works also relate to a number of Moore's influences, including the metal helmet he would have worn as a soldier in the First World War, and the non-Western tribal masks he saw in the British Museum as a student at the Royal College of Art in the 1920s. Moore wrote to the Wakefield Art Gallery director about his process of making this work. In his notes he says, "I laid my strips of wax in the pattern that they are in the finished object. Then this was covered up with a further layer of the mixture of plaster and ground up pottery, and the whole put into a kiln, so that the wax melts out and leaves a space where it was, that is, between the core and the outside plaster. This space is filled with molten bronze, so that you get an exact replica of what the wax was." The Hepworth Wakefield acquired Moore's open work head No. 2 in 1952 with the assistance of the Contemporary Art Society. The impressive bronze added to the gallery's growing collection of Moore sculptures. Born locally, Moore kept close ties with the gallery throughout his life. This trophy head is one of the most important artifacts of the Ashanti culture. Ashanti was an ancient kingdom in modern-day Ghana. The kingdom controlled the richest natural gold resources in West Africa and was known as a nation of superb warriors. This object was made by an Ashanti goldsmith. The head has features of a different ethnic group, probably depicting a high-status defeated enemy. The trophy head would have been attached to a ceremonial sword. It was among treasures seized by British soldiers from King Kofi Karikari during the Anglo-Ashanti War of 1873–74. We don't know exactly when the head was made, nor whether it portrays a specific person. We do know that King Warassa of Banda was defeated and beheaded by the Ashanti in the 1760s. Artisans in the city of Kumasi then made a cast of his head. The head in the Wallace collection, although stylized, could also represent a specific dignitary. The warrior's hair is shaven at the back, and his status is indicated by scars on the sides of his head. He once wore earrings with mysterious pegs either side of his mouth. The head wears a stylized beard, and the eyes have a rope pattern along the edges to represent lashes. This earthenware horse was an emblem of wealth and power in Tang China. It was excavated from a Chinese tomb in the 19th century, where many tombs were uncovered during the construction of the railway in the 1880s. Pottery pieces in this style were used by aristocrats as funerary objects, in other words, to commemorate the dead. The maker has left their mark on the side of the saddle. A fingerprint is lightly embossed onto the surface just below the seating ridge. The skilled craftsman's fingerprint is around 1,100 years old. From the 1880s onwards, the Chinese began building railways. Workers uncovered many burial sites as they dug up the land. These were full of ritual and household objects which came onto the market and were eagerly bought up by collectors. Throughout the 1880s, railway expansion happened rapidly. Goods such as silk, porcelain and spices were transported by rail to shipping ports to be exported around the world. Horses have been used in China as far back as the Shang dynasty from 1600 to 1100 BC, but these were mainly strong working animals. When horses from Central Asia and the Middle East were imported during the 1st century BC, they became the inspiration for artists, poets and composers. Though not traditionally figurative, certain elements of this piece suggest the title characters: the reclining figure of a mother, the smaller form of a child, an eye peering out from a headstone. Carved from pink Ancaster stone, the theme of mother and child was a consistent motif for Hepworth. This version, made several months before the artist gave birth to triplets, marks a shift in her art towards more abstract forms. It also shows her taking the significant step of separating the child from the body of the mother, suggested by the poignant open space between the two forms. Barbara Hepworth is one of the most important British sculptors of the 20th century. While on a travel scholarship as an art graduate, she learned to carve from a master craftsman in Rome and returned to England with a passion for direct carving. Using this method, the sculptor carves directly into wood or stone to create their piece, as opposed to modelling it in clay for another craftsman to make the final piece. During her career, Hepworth moved away from representational or naturalistic pieces to more abstract geometric work. The mother and child demonstrates her passion for shape and form. Only the suggestion of eye holes carved into the head of the mother stone indicate her subject. Hepworth created the sculpture using a method of direct carving, allowing the form to emerge through the act of carving the stone. This large elmwood sculpture was made in 1936 and is one of 6 reclining figures Moore carved in elmwood between 1935 and 1978. Moore believed the human figure was the most complex and subtle form a sculptor could produce. He also discovered that wood offered advantages over stone. It was easier to work, allowing him to open up the sculpture. Wood also offered its own sense of vitality as a living, growing object. The natural landscape was a great inspiration to Moore. The hills and dips found in nature can be read in the undulating forms of this reclining figure. Elmwood has a wide grain which suited Moore's larger sculptures. He'd incised his sculptures to expose the grain or work with the patterns in the grain to enhance the form of his figure. You can see this in the figure's protruding knee or the way the shoulders accentuated. Moore's reclining figure rolls and dips with the hills of the natural landscape. There's a sense of the primitive about this form that ties it to nature. Throughout his life, Moore maintained these landscape-like forms always referenced his home county of Yorkshire. This wheel-thrown fritware jug with sealing wax red hyacinths and cobalt blue pomegranates was made in Iznik, Western Anatolia, a renowned ceramic centre during the Ottoman Empire. It's characteristic of late 16th century production. The bright red colour was only used from 1560 onwards. The jug was exported to Elizabethan London, where in 1592 it was fitted with fashionable silver gilt mounts to protect its edges. Although it's shaped like a jug, it was actually meant for drinking ale or beer. As a French visitor remarked in 1558, the English drank beer not out of glasses, but from earthen pots with silver handles and covers, and this even in houses of persons of middling fortune. British attitudes to Turks were ambivalent in the 16th and 17th centuries. As contact between the Ottoman Empire and England increased, the Turk became a common and stereotypically villainous figure on the British stage. A reference in Shakespeare's Othello to a malignant and turbaned Turk, the circumcised dog, is typically abusive. This attitude was based upon the long-standing antipathy between the Islamic East and the Christian West. The design is typical of 16th century Iznik ware, with red hyacinths and cobalt blue pomegranates standing out against a clean, bright white background. The brilliant colours were the innovation of Turkish artists who'd previously imitated the blue-on-white decoration of Chinese porcelain. The stylized vegetation was intended to evoke the miracle of Allah's creations, with Muslims believing pomegranate trees to be holy. Iznik tiles with floral decoration were, and still are, made to decorate the interiors of mosques. Near Eastern material culture was highly valued in Elizabethan England. In early 1582, diplomacy between the English court and that of the Ottoman Sultan Murad III led to the founding of the Turkish Company, later called the Levant Company, which facilitated trade between Turkey and England. This wheel-thrown This beautifully carved Buddha comes from the ancient region of Gandhara in northwest Pakistan. Buddhism arrived from northern India and was embraced by the wealthy Gandharan people. They constructed Buddhist monasteries and sacred sites and decorated them with carvings and statues. For the first time, these statues depicted Buddha in human form, replacing traditional symbols that were previously used. This sculpture has a serene facial expression with a halo encircling the head. The Buddha's left arm would originally have been raised in a gesture known as Abhaya Mudra, representing protection, peace, and dispelling of fear. The Hellenistic conqueror Alexander the Great founded cities to settle his soldiers as he moved east towards India. These residents brought their own distinctive culture, religion, and art to their new homes. Early Buddhist art began to develop in the Gandhara area, where it drew heavily upon the Greco-Roman tradition of Alexander the Great. This influence can be seen in the naturalistic drapery of the robes, which resemble Greek clothing known as himation. Gandharan sculpture and reliefs became popular souvenirs for soldiers, collectors, and explorers during British colonial rule. Sculptural fragments were routinely chiselled off the buildings to be taken back to Britain, although this will be illegal today. Look out for the deep gouges on the back of this statue, which were caused by a metal chisel when it was removed from a wall. Buddhism came to the Gandhara region in the 3rd century BC, but it wasn't until the arrival of Indo-Greek settlers that the Buddha was represented in human form. Up until that point, Buddha was depicted by symbols such as a wheel, a footprint, or the Bodhi tree. One theory suggests that this shift happened because new settlers were more attracted to classical cults. These Mediterranean cults often focused on the statue of a deity. In response to this competition, Buddhist temples began producing statues of their own. This partially restored paint-decorated jar was used to store oil or wine. It was discovered at the palace at Knossos, Crete, which was excavated by Sir Arthur Evans between 1900 and 1931. This palace, and other smaller palaces in Crete, bear testimony to one of the first highly developed civilizations of Europe, called the Minoans, after the legendary King Minos mentioned in Greek myth. Painted pottery like this are often the only surviving evidence for the Mediterranean trading network that once connected Crete with Egypt, the Levant, and mainland Greece. The pot blends both Minoan and Mycenaean stylistic traits. The jar is typically Mycenaean in shape, but the octopus is a popular Minoan motif. Minoan pottery typically shows lifelike animals created through close observation of nature. The Mycenaean style of the octopus design on other vessels was much more abstract than on our octopus pot. The octopus pot is a luxury version of a storage jar. Ordinarily, pots like these were larger and not decorated with painted motifs, but this example features 2 octopuses in mineral paint. Murex shells are also shown between the tentacles. The design reflects the close relationship of Minoan society with the sea. Before modern artificial dyes were made, murex or sea snails were used to create a purple dye known as Tyrian purple. This natural colour was often used for wall painting and textile dyeing across the East Mediterranean. The kiss is one of Rodin's most famous works and a widely recognised emblem for love. The sculpture depicts 2 lovers wrapped in a forbidden embrace just moments before their undoing. The lovers depicted are Paolo Malatesta and Francesca da Rimini, characters from Dante's Inferno. As the couple sat reading the legends of Lancelot and Guinevere, the love between them grew. But Francesca was married to Paolo's brother, Gianciotto, and the moment they kissed, Gianciotto discovered and murdered them both. Rodin's work is often seen as a precursor to modern sculpture. Though he trained in the traditional methods of his craft, his work moved away from the idealized forms usually found in traditional sculpture. Instead, his human figures are more natural in form, often positioned in ways that lend physicality to their inner emotions. The emotional intensity and technical mastery of the kiss helped establish Rodin's reputation as the greatest French sculptor of the 19th century. Rodin's work is often seen as a precursor to modern sculpture. Though he trained in the traditional methods of his craft, his work moved away from the idealized forms usually found in traditional sculpture. Instead, his human figures are more natural. The kiss originally formed part of Rodin's larger sculpture, The Gates of Hell. Based on Dante's Inferno, this piece stands at a staggering 6 meters high and features around 180 figures from various stages of Dante's poem. Among these figures are several versions of Paolo and Francesca during their final damnation. Apparently, Rodin removed the kiss as he felt their rapturous embrace was at odds with the depictions of the pair's suffering. This rare enamelled cockerel figurine was discovered in the grave of a young Roman child in Cirencester in the UK. The cockerel is associated with the god Mercury. The presence of the figurine in a child's grave may have been intended as an offering to Mercury to ensure the child safely reached the afterlife. This figurine is one of only 10 known examples from the Roman world, including 4 from Britain. The cockerel was found during excavations in Cirencester between 2011 and 2015. The excavation recorded 118 burials and 8 cremation burials within the remains of the western cemetery of the Roman town of Corinium. Ceramics and other artifacts from the graves indicate that the cemetery was in use from the late 1st century to the 4th century AD. The tailpiece is an example of early ornate metalwork and would originally have been brightly coloured with yellow, blue and red enamelling. The cockerel also features patterned enamelling on the breast and wing plate. This This ancient Greek soldier's helmet was discovered on the shore of the Euripus Strait, near the ancient port town of Aulis, Greece. It would have belonged to a hoplite soldier, an armoured soldier who fought with a long spear. It may have even seen war in the Battle of Marathon, a bloody conflict during the Greco-Persian Wars. Helmets were often ritually destroyed when their owner died, so its survival is interesting. Perhaps it was lost overboard on a ship travelling to war. Alas, it's not possible to establish if the dents on the crest are indeed from the sea or some ancient battle. A skilled craftsman forged this helmet from a very thin single sheet of bronze, beating it into shape to fit the head. Intricate decoration runs along the brow, nasal ridge and bottom edge, which is likely a personalised design. This type of helmet was intended to protect a soldier's head and nose, with slits for the eyes. However, it covered the wearer's ears, making communication between soldiers very difficult. Dents are scattered along the crest of the helmet, offering clues to its story. Did it bash against rocks and other debris whilst in the sea? Yet, if this were the case, it's likely the long nose piece would also be damaged. Perhaps instead the dents are much older, suggesting evidence. Dents are scattered along the crest of the helmet, offering clues to its story. Did it bash against rocks and other debris whilst in the sea? Yet, if this were the case, it's likely the long nose piece would also be damaged. Perhaps instead the dents are much older, suggesting evidence of ancient battle damage. Given its ample size and weight, this helmet would have been uncomfortable to wear. Imagine how the hot, sunny climate would have exacerbated this. It's likely the wearer would have lined or padded the inside of the helmet to provide some relief. Later styles of helmet were worn tipped back on the head, similar to a modern-day baseball cap. When Colonel Montague acquired this helmet, he believed it had been worn during the ancient Battle of Marathon. This battle took place in 490 BC during the first Persian invasion of Greece. The Athenians and their allies chose the battleground, seeking marshes and mountainous terrain, to stop the Persian cavalry from joining the main army. Led by Miltiades, the Athenians claimed a bloody victory. The Persian soldiers fled in panic, slaughtered in their numbers. The battle became a watershed moment in the Greco-Persian Wars, and the 200 years that followed saw the rise of the classical Greek civilization. This watercolour painting is one of a series of studies Turner made of Bellinzona in around 1842. These sketches were for larger works which were never painted. When it was first donated to Oldham Museum and Art Gallery, the painting was titled Bridge over the Moselle. However, in 1980 it was suggested that the scene was in fact Bellinzona, Switzerland. This was later confirmed. The painting originally belonged to Charles Lees, the son of a wealthy industrialist who built his fortune from the cotton industry. Lees donated the painting to Oldham Museum in around 1888. Turner is widely regarded as one of the founders of modern-day European watercolour painting. In the past, artists used watercolour as a way of recording the world in a detailed and realistic manner. With Turner, a new approach emerged. In his paintings, Turner worked to capture the light and energy of a scene, evoking a sense of atmosphere rather than a true-to-life depiction. Watercolour was originally seen as a useful method for sketching, but during the first half of the 1800s it became more accepted as a medium in its own right. Watercolour offered a means to explore more conceptual ideas like the beauty of nature. During this time, owning a watercolour of a classical site or important place would have signalled to others that you'd taken part in a particular cultural experience. This painting is filled with the evocative atmosphere for which Turner is known. The scene is painted in watercolour over a slight pencil outline. Light touches and dabs of watercolour wash evoke the scene, while a small amount of dabbing and texturing hints at the roughness of the rocks in the foreground. In watercolour paintings such as this, Turner often painted onto wet paper to soften the edges of forms and achieve subtle gradation effects.